Dalid. Okay, so we're learning the Maimer Ani ledodi Tavshin Chavav, which is in Sefer Mamar Meluk Dalid. We are holding Eis Dalid. And last year we learned and last year we learned the Alter Rebbe's mashal, the famous mashal of Melech Besada, that the time of Elul is described as a time when the king finds himself in the field. Usually the king is in his palace, and if anybody wants to see him, wants to be received by the king, he needs special permission, and typically only the most highest people in society are allowed into the king. On the other hand, when the king is traveling in the field, so at that time everybody is allowed to um, the king allows everybody to approach him, and he receives everybody. The Sefer Panim Yafis Panim Seichkes. Makalim Sefer Panim Yafis Panim Seichkes. And the Rebbe explained to us in the Marshal of the Alter Rebbe, the Nimshal is that in Tishrei, Nasei Simei Tshuva, is a time when people have to be holding on a very high level of Avodah. A person has to be on a very high level of serving the Eibishter in order to be received. On the other hand, the time of Elul is a time when every single Yid, no matter where he's holding, where he's doing, what his situation in serving the Eibishter is, the Eibishter receives him and shows him a happy face and a smiling face. That's what we learned last week. And until now, the Rebbe was more or less just saying what the Alter Rebbe said in Likutei Torah. Now the Rebbe starts showing a new depth in this mashal of the Alter Rebbe and in this story of a neshama, of our neshamas down here in this world, serving the Eibishter in this time of the year. And the Rebbe starts with two questions. So we're going to start. Eis Daled. The Rebbe asks, if the point of the Alter Rebbe is to explain that the revelation of Elul and the power that's given through this revelation is to every single person, regardless of his situation, of where he's holding in his service to the Eibishter. So if that's what the Alter Rebbe wants to explain to us, so the only thing that's important is that when the king finds himself in the field, everybody is able to and is given and is permitted to go and see the king, right? We're trying to explain that Elul is a very special time of the year. That even if a person finds himself in a situation where he's lacking in his service of the Eibishter, he's not where he's supposed to be, he's on a very low level, he's able to see the king. So in order to explain this, if the Alter Rebbe wants to give us a mashal so we could better envision it, all the Alter Rebbe has to tell us is that the king finds himself in the field. And when the king is in the field, it's not like when he's in the palace. When he's in the field, everybody's allowed to approach him. Why does the Alter Rebbe add more details? Why does the Alter Rebbe also add that the king receives everybody with a pleasant face and he shows a smiling face to everybody? That's unimportant and seemingly has nothing to do with the fact that everybody can go and see the king. If the idea is that everybody can go and get closer to the king and get closer to the Eibishter, the way the king reacts has nothing to do to this understanding. So why does the Alter Rebbe add that to the mashal? And the Rebbe says the question is even stronger. This that the king receives everybody with a pleasant face and he shows them a smiling face. Over here, we're already talking about the second part of the story, that after the person went out to the field, he made his effort, he did his avodah to go and see the king. Now the king gives him revelations, the king shows him his love to him, he shows him a pleasant face, and this lifts the person up even further. But this is the second part of the story, after the Yid did his work. This is what the king does to help the Yid in his work. That has no place in Elul, seemingly. Move on. It's not understood. The revelation and drawing down of light, of godliness, after the work of the Yid, which is the ledodi li in Elul, he says he made tshuva. This is in the time of the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The mashal the Alter Rebbe gives us for the king being in the field, who bir ala gili de Elul. He's trying to explain to us what the story of Elul is, which is ansinas kerech v'lifnei ha'avodah, which is empowering us, but not actually giving us anything. And this happens before we actually do the work. The king empowers us to do the work to serve him by going out to the field, but he doesn't actually give us anything. So why does the Alter Rebbe put it there? It's not only that it doesn't have to do, it seems to also be talking about a different stage in the game. Yeah, simple question. Doesn't this part that the king shows a pleasant face and a smiling face doesn't have to do with this part of the story. Ganz arg love, and there also asks, in the way the Alter Rebbe describes it is that the king receives everybody with a pleasant face and that he shows them a smiling face. So in the one instance, the Alter Rebbe says he receives them with a pleasant face, and in the other case it says and he shows them a smiling face. Why the Alter Rebbe isn't playing with words. The Alter Rebbe means to be conveying some idea over here, some concept. What's the concept of that he receives people, of receiving them, and what's the concept of showing them a smiling face? There's a difference over here. By the Alter Rebbe, every single word, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that the Alter Rebbe used to measure every word before he spoke anything. He measured it to make sure that it would be exact and that nothing bad could come out of those words. Sometimes we say something, you say something to somebody, and you mean to say something good, and the person can take it the wrong way, or the person can mislead a person sometimes. The Alter Rebbe would measure every word before he said it. This is famous. And certainly when it came to Alter Rebbe's Torah, every single word was measured. So what's this idea over here? The king receives people and he shows them a smiling face. There's two concepts, there's two ideas going on over here. What are they? And the second part is, when it says that the king receives them, he says that the king receives them with a nice face, with a pleasant face. When it says that the king shows them his face, he says a smiling face. So there's two, he's talking about two different things over here. The Alter Rebbe simply could have said, or just said one of them, or what's this? There's like two parts, there's two distinct things happening over here. There's a mekablam, and that's b'sefer panim yafis, and there's a maralem, and that's panim seichekes.
Well, people want to know that when they're going to meet the king, that he's going to have, they don't see him all year round. Punk now, he's out in the field. So people that don't know, that they want to know that he's happy to see them. Now, that'll be more of a drive to go see him.
So you're learning that this is a detail
It's a detail to welcome people.
In Elul, to welcome people.
To welcome people.
Okay, it's not a bad thought, but the problem is that if it's a detail, if we're saying that we're trying to entice people to come to see the king, I'm going to say the king will be smiling at you, so we're enticing you. And in Elul, we're not supposed to be enticing you. We're supposed to be making it possible.
The mere fact that it's Melech Basod is already an enticement.
It's not an enticement. It makes it possible. And you have a good point. We'll see later in the moment. But certainly in advertising that the king will be smiling to everybody, he'll be in a good mood.
It takes away from that.
It takes away from the person's avodah. Okay. And your question that the fact that the king's in the field, so in Gimel, in the end of Gimel, the Rebbe described the way that when a king, like we brought a muscle to this, when the American president is in the Oval Office, then everybody's really dying to get and then to find a way to get there. But when he's just traveling through somewhere, it's not really that enticing. But but you do have a point there, but we'll get to it later in the moment. Okay. Now the Rebbe begins until the end of Dalit, then in Hey and in Vav, the Rebbe shows us that the Alter Rebbe was hiding a much deeper message over here in his mashal of what's going on in Melech Basada, and it's Ulei Hashem's the Chiddush of the Rebbe, but it's the Rebbe showing a depth in the Alter Rebbe's mashal, and the Rebbe starts building his case over here. The Rebbe says, "Behaktem sha'chidush b'gilu del gimel mitzrachim be'alul gabe gilu b'rosh hashanah v'yom kippurim u'b'shnei inyanim." The Chiddush of the revelation of the 13 attributes of mercy that occur in the month of Elul, compared to the revelation that you have in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is in two aspects, in two dimensions. Right? We learned last week that in Elul you have the revelation of the Gimel Midas Harachamim, which is a Gilui Shalamayla Meishtalshlus, and then you have an even higher Gilui in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we explained that the Gilui that's in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it actually drags the person along. It's so overwhelming, so overpowering, that it pulls the person into a certain situation. It's Matil ema v'fachad, of fear befalls the person from this revelation. Mashenkin and Gimel Tzrachim and Elul is in a way that it only gives the person the power. So that says over here, there's two chedushim in this point. The first one is, and this is along the lines of what we already learned earlier, in order to receive, in order to be worthy of receiving the revelation of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you have to be on a very high level. The special people, the Yechidei Skula, and the select few. But however, on the other hand, in order to receive the revelation of the month of Elul, which is the Gimel the only thing you have to do is go out and receive the king. Go out to the field, go out to wherever it is that he's traveling through, and go and see him. In the Nimshol, that is who he's that all a Yid has to do in Elul in order to connect to the Eibishter is to awaken within him his acceptance of the yoke of heaven. In other words, a Yid has to say to himself, the Eibishter is the king and I am his subject, I am his servant, and I accept upon myself to serve the Eibishter. For the revelation of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, you actually have to accomplish something in your service of the Eibishter. You have to reach a higher level. You have to get somewhere. It's not enough to just, to lay down the foundation and the basis that I accept the Eibishter as my king and I'll do what he says. You actually have to follow through with a very high Aveda along those lines. Mashenkin and Elul, it's enough just to accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven. So this is the first Chiddush, and we really described this Chiddush earlier already. It seems to me that this is not a new point. The eighth Chiddush, and another Chiddush in the revelation of Elul, the revelation of the Chiddush of the month of Elul is also to those, top of Shin Samachay, the third line of Shin Samachay. The revelation in the month of Elul is also to those who find themselves in the desert of the Lu'umazah and the desert of the side that opposes Kedusha, in other words, in the desert of Klippah. And this already is a very big chiddush of the Rebbe. Until now, what did we say? The Melech is where? The Melech is Besada. We didn't make a statement. We didn't say anything about where the person is holding. We just said that he's far, he's distant. But the king is in the Sada. The Sada, he's in the field. So it's not his palace. But it's not a place of evil. It's not a place of treachery. It's not a place of lumas, of klippah. It's just out in the field, and because he's out in the field, you can come and approach him. The Rebbe says over here, that's not the proper understanding of what the Alter Rebbe is saying. What the Alter Rebbe is saying is the Melech Besada is that the Melech actually goes out and reaches out. He doesn't go out, we'll see in a few lines, he doesn't go out to a place of lumas, to say Chas v'Shalom, that the Eibishter arrives, so to speak. The Eibishter reveals himself in klippus and lumas, that you can't say. However, the Eibishter reveals himself to those, not those that are in the field, or not just those that are in the field, even those that are in the desert. A desert in Chassidus is in general a concept of a place where you don't have Gilui Likus, where you have the power of Klippah is strong over there. Even to people who find themselves in such a situation, that the definition of the fact that they're distant from the king is that they're actually stuck in klips and sitracha, they're stuck in things that are asra al pitera, the king reveals himself to them over there also. And how does it work? When the Rebbe says, if you think about the Alter Rebbe's mashal, you'll see that it's actually a simple conclusion to come to, that this is what's going on. Because what's the whole purpose of revealing the 13 attributes of mercy that Gimel Midas Rachmim in Elul is to give the person power to do tshuva. Now, what do you do tshuva for? Taka says that the Mashiach Asal Asav Tzadikai B'tiyufta, right? The Mashiach will return even the righteous, even the tzaddikim. Mashiach will bring them to do tshuva, to repent, which doesn't mean repenting from actual sin, because tzaddikim don't have sin. If not, they wouldn't be called a tzaddik. So there's ideas in tshuva that apply even to a tzaddik gomer. But the literal meaning and the simple meaning, when you say tshuva, you mean to say somebody who literally sinned, literally did something that's punished aser al pitera shasar leisasa mamish aser. The Eibishter told him don't do it, and he did it. Or the Eibishter told him do something, and he didn't do what the Eibishter said. Mamish, somebody Rahman Litzlan has sinned. That's what you do tshuva for. The tshuva g'pshoti alyan built it tzvim b'chinas midbar, which is the idea of a desert. V'ikra tshuva al prikas oil. And when a person comes to do tshuva, the main aved of tshuva is to repent for the fact that I threw off from upon myself the yoke of heaven. In other words, that I said that the Eibishter said like this and like that, and I said, so what? That's what chof is, prikaso. To say the Eibishter wants like this and like this, and the person, by the fact that he didn't listen, so to one degree or another, he threw off of himself the yoke of heaven. He said that what the Eibishter wants does not apply to me. It's not important to me, Rahman al-Islam. And this is what Shuv is. And if this is why we reveal the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, so that people can do tshuva for such things, so it means that it's even to those who are at the extreme distance from the Eibishter. In other words, that they're sunken in klippus. Why then did the Alter Rebbe say that the revelation of Elul is in the Sada, which is not a place of sin? The Sada is not a high level like the city, but it's not a place of sin. It's a civilized place still. So the understanding is like this: because the revelation of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim isn't in the desert itself. Because in things that are against the Eibishter's will, you can't say that there is a revelation of the Eibishter in that thing. Right? This is it's a general concept that's discussed in many places. What's the definition of sin? What makes something a bad thing? Right? We have Edus Chukim and Mishpatim, and you would think that even in Mishpatim, for example, not to steal. Why shouldn't somebody steal? You would think not to steal because it's not moral, it's not ethical to steal from somebody else. It belongs to that person, and you're going and you're taking what's his, not to kill, etc., etc. And it's that statement is certainly true. But what turns it evil? What makes it evil? Because human beings decide that it's evil. You could say that's an opinion. In this society, in this civilization, this is considered no good. And in another civilization, and this has happened in the history of mankind, in another civilization, if you want to give somebody a test, if he can enter the army, see if he'll ambush somebody and kill him. Stam a person. And that will be a test that he's a brave person. He's ready to fight. He's ready to hold a sword. He's ready to spill blood. And it was considered a good thing by the Goyim, not by the Yid. So you can't rely on what people say. I mean, if anybody has been at all aware of what's going on in the world over the past couple of years, we can all understand this, that if your definition of good and evil is what people decide is good and what people decide is evil, you're in very shaky ground. So the definition of evil is that it's against the Eibishter. There's the Tzad HaKdusha, and then there's the Sitra Achra, the Lu'umazeh, the opposing side, the opposite side. There's what the Eibishter wants, and there's what the Eibishter doesn't want. If the Eibishter doesn't want it, why does it exist? It exists so that so that we could have the choice between good and evil. If we don't have the choice between good and evil, then what's the whole purpose of giving us mitzvahs? If we don't have a choice anyways. We're just robots that are doing what the Eibishter wants. So you have good and evil, and then there's also the Nakuda of Dirub Tachtainim. The Eibishter wanted there to be a very low world, and that should be perfected into a dwelling place for himself. So that's why the Eibishter made the Klippus and Avodah Zarah. It's like we brought a mashal for it once over here, that, for example, if somebody goes to the store and he wants to buy food, so he goes over to the cashier and he pays. Paying for the food isn't really what he wanted to do. He wants the food so he could eat it. Nervous. He knows it says in Torah you're not allowed to steal. So he knows that you have to pay for the food, but he didn't come to the store to pay food, to pay money. He came to the store to get food. In order to get the food, he had to do something else. Klippus and Sitra Achra is to an even further degree is not the Ratzon of the Eibishter. It's Hepech the Ratzon of the Eibishter. And that's what makes it evil, and that's what makes it bad. And to say that in such a place you have a revelation of godliness, that the Eibishter reveals himself, and these things that the Eibishter said is Toyeva, is disgusting, is dirty, in such a place you can't say there's a revelation of the Eibishter. And Taka, that's why the revelation of Elul is not in the Midbar. The king does not reveal himself in the Klippus. Midbar is a parable, is a way to describe evil, sin. The Eibishter does not reveal himself there. So if you look in the words, you see that he says, it could be talking about, is the Eibishter the one who creates it? Or is it that the Eibishter reveals himself over there? If you're talking about revelation, that is only in Torah and Mitzvahs and Kedusha. Never Chas v'Shalom in Aveiros and Klippus. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says, that the king reveals himself where? In the Sada. So what does this mean? What's the field? The field is referring to a Yid who finds himself in the desert. And the Eibishter reveals himself to that Yid who's stuck and trapped in all of these klippas. So you have a Yid Rachmana litzlan who left the ways of Yiddishkeit, is not Shemer Shabbos, doesn't eat kosher, etc., etc. This not keeping Shabbos, this not eating kosher, that's all a desert. The Yid who finds himself in that situation, he's the field. And the Eibishter reveals himself to the Yid who finds himself trapped in this terrible situation. The Hagili Behem, and this revelation of the Eibishter to the Yid who's in this situation, who Hanasinas Kayach, that empowers him, that the Yid should leave the desert, Lesada, and to go to the actual field, Lekabel Pnei HaMelech, to receive the king. So the important takeaway over here that was emphasizing to us over here is that if we think about it, we're talking about a situation over here where the king, the Eibishter, shows himself to a Yid who finds himself in a situation of klippus and sitra achre, of a Yid who finds himself in a situation of sin, and he's trapped in it. And if this is the type of people that we are talking about, that the Alter Rebbe is talking about, so the Rebbe adds, this, that the Alter Rebbe writes, that the king receives everybody with a pleasant face. What does the Alter Rebbe mean with the word kulam? We already said we already said that the melech is yetzel lasada. It includes those who are trapped in klip and sitra achre. So what are we adding now? Kulam? More klip and more sitra achre? We already said, like, it's not really anything new to kulam. What does the Alter Rebbe mean with the word kulam? It's a whole new category, the Rebbe says. Listen to this part. Even those who the most they can muster is a will, is a desire to come closer to the Eibishter, to see the king. But they can't succeed in doing it. They're held captive in the Yitzhahara. Even when they are awakened with a desire to do tshuva, to repent, to come back to the Eibishter, and to re-accept upon themselves the yoke of heaven, the person can't actually follow through on it. He's stuck in his klippus and sitra achres. He's stuck doing the things that he's not allowed to do. He remembers about the Eibishter because of the revelation of Chodesh Elul. He wants to come back to the Eibishter, and he just can't help himself because he accustomed himself. He's so strengthened his Yetzer Hara that he is now held in complete captivity in the hands of his Yetzer Hara. So he's like a person sitting in a prison cell who says, I want to go back to my home. I want to go back to my family. I want to go back to my father. But he's locked in the cage. He can't go out. And therefore, he does nothing more. He only feels this desire within him to come back to the Eibishter. Yeah. Right? Gamaisam. What does the king do? What does the Eibishter do? The Eibishter sees this. The Eibishter sees a Yid who is awakened with a desire to return to him and to come closer to him, to put himself in the situation, in his natural situation where he should be, where a Yid belongs. So the king receives them with a pleasant face. And this fact that the king shows them his pleasant face, this now awakens within them a very strong and powerful desire to see the king. Not like the first will, which was weak. It couldn't overcome the power of the prison cell of the Yetzer Hara. But because the king now shows them his shining face, so this now grants them extra strength. And through this new will that's awakened within them, now they're actually able to overcome the obstacles that are in their way and actually come back to the king. So we have now over here a whole new understanding of the Seder of the Aveda of Elul. Until now, we thought the Seder of the Aveda of Elul is that you have those who are on a very low level, and therefore they're not worthy to come and see the king. So the king goes out to their level, and then they can see the king, and they come and they see the king. The Rebbe says, no, we're talking about a much more severe situation. We're talking about a situation where you have people who are actually trapped in sin. They sinned against the king. They went against his ways. They rebelled against the king. And not only that, even when the king says, I'm coming out to the field, I'm revealing myself to you. that doesn't have enough power. All that does is it gives them a feeling, a desire to see the king, but they can't leave their old ways. They're still trapped in the hands of their Yetzer Hara. They can't free themselves and actually follow through on this impetus, on this urge that they have to come closer to the king. So what does the king do? So the first part is that they're awakened to come and see the king, but they don't follow through. The king shows them his pleasant face. He receives them with his pleasant face. And seeing the king looking at you with a pleasant face gives you extra oomph, extra power, and that actually gives you the drive that you need to actually break out of the prison cell of the Yetzer Hara and actually come to the king. So it's a two-step process, right? The king goes out to the field, in other words, reveals himself to the Yid who's stuck in the klippus. This awakens with, but that's it. Now the Yid has his job to be Makabel El Malchus Shemayim, to awaken within him the desire for Kabbalah Soil, at least, the will. So that's his work. And then the king comes and starts schlepping him out even more. The king shows him a smile, a pleasant face, and now the Yid actually manages to break free and to come closer to the king.
That's seriously the question. Why you need Yotz Vasoda
and the smiling face.
And the pleasant face. The smiling face we're going to get to soon. The pleasant face, right? That's why we need this detail, because before we didn't realize just how stuck the people that we're talking about are. We thought that it's time, just need a little extra help. They're not filling their days with Torah and mitzvahs. Instead of they finish work, you go to a ball game, go to this, not vayam not sin. Go to a ball game. I don't know how, it's a mitzvah. But a tzaddik wouldn't go. A tzaddik would go, sit down and learn, would find a mitzvah to do. So we're saying that we're trying to elevate people. We're saying instead of stam going out, in other words, we're not talking about somebody who finds recreational activities from time to time in order to energize him. We're saying his regular day-to-day schedule doesn't involve serving the Eibishter. He comes to shul, he davens, he even goes to mikveh, he has his 1 or 2 shiurim, but coffee, coffee and cake in Cholant. Instead of serving the Eibishter, instead of coming to the Beis Medrash to learn, and instead of going some mezuzah, tefillin, and all the other things that he's supposed to do, find another yid, volunteer, find a chavrusa, all the other different types of works of chesed, go volunteer in a hospital, all of the different works that a yid is supposed to be into, he doesn't do that. We thought those are the people we're talking about. And for us, Shani Yom Kippur, the Eibishter wants to elevate us. So he gives us, he goes out to the Sada to elevate us, to bring us closer to him, so that our lives should revolve around the king a little more, not so much around ourselves and our own, whatever you want to call it, laziness or tivus, whatever you want to call it. The Rebbe says, no, we're not talking about those people. We're also talking about those people. We're talking about people who Pashat fell into sin. Avedis, they rebelled against the king. Midbar Mamish. For those people, it's not enough to go out to the field, because that will make them want to come to the king, but they're not going to be able to follow through. For that, they need the king to smile. And you see, the Rebbe's smiling face is the best muscle we could have. The Rebbe looks at you with a smiling face. It lifts up. It brings a chayas. It's a whole other story. So that's why we need the second part. Now the third part. Now the panim seichikis. Umeisif b'hamaymer. The Alter Rebbe doesn't stop there. The Alter Rebbe adds, that the king shows a smiling face to everybody. And remember, the Rebbe pointed out earlier that when it comes to show a pleasant face, he says that the king receives them with a pleasant face. When it comes to Panim Seichkes, the king shows them a pleasant face, a smiling face. So that was going to explain the difference over here. The when you say that you receive something, the proper usage for it in language is, I received something, isn't I created something. I received something that existed already. There was just a transfer. Before it was in one place, now I received it, but the thing existed already. Nothing new was created over here. Okay. What's man upon him seichkes? It's not that I received something that already existed by somebody else and I received it. He always had it. He's not receiving something over here. The king always had this panim seichkes. So this thing that the king had He's showing it and revealing it to somebody else. Right? Got that? Clear? Mekabel means that the king receives something from somebody else. He receives something from the Yid. The Yid comes to him and gives him something, and the king receives it. Maralehem panim seichakes, he shows them a shining face, means that the king already had it. It's not something that he got from the Yid through the Yid's Aveda. The king already had it. He's revealing it to the Yid. Okay? Rav Moshe is clear? Okay. That's why the Alter Rebbe adds that after the king receives everyone with a pleasant face, the Alter Rebbe adds that there's another level, a third point, that he shows everybody a smiling face. What is this referencing? That the will that the king, that the nation has. The king accepts it. He approves of it. He's happy with it. He says, this is a good thing, that the nation wants to come and see me. And that the king shows them a smiling face. This is already a whole new level. That after the person is awakened with a desire to do tshuva, so now the Eibishter shows him his panim seichkes, the Eibishter reveals to him his own happiness. In other words, if we talk about the Yid and the Eibishter, right? That's what we're talking about the whole time over here. The king and his nation, the king and his people, the Yid and the Eibishter. And the Yid is connected to the Eibishter. He may travel far, find himself even in a midbar, but he's connected to the Eibishter. And the king accepts this tshuva that the Yid does. When the Yid says, I remembered that I'm really connected to the Eibishter. I remembered my connection to the Eibishter, and now I'm coming and I'm offering it to the Eibishter. I'm coming back and I'm saying, please accept me. You're right, Kianu Amecha, right? We are your nation. I'm connected to you. You are our king. I'm your nation. I'm coming. I'm connected. I'm coming to you. And this the king receives. The king accepts this. And in order to help the Yid, the king goes and shows him the king's smiling face. The king says, thank you very much, but you think that's it? You think that's the totality of the story over here? Let me show you there's much more. Our connection runs much deeper. There's also my story. The Eibishter says, there's also my part of the story over here. There's the Eibishter's panim seichkes that he says, you are my child. Not that the king, that the Yid says, I'm coming to you because I am your child. The Eibishter says, you are my child. And this the Eibishter reveals to the Yid. The Eibishter's deep pleasure that he has in a Yid, the Eibishter reveals to the Yid who comes to do tshuva. And this pleasure that the Eibishter has is much higher, is much greater than the pleasure that comes from an awakening of tshuva. We'll do this part fast, like it's explained in other places. The source of the schayk, from where does the panim seichkes that the king has, that the king shows, this comes from the essence of the pleasure. In other words, it's a tainug atzmi habilti murkav. It's a simple pleasure that's not dependent on various details. It's a pleasure that exists on its own. Which is higher than the pleasure that comes through something which is a tainug murkav. It's a tainug that's comprised of many different details. So it's very subtle things over here that there are references. But the basic idea is that the king that the king says, the Eibishter says, that you came to me, you came to do tshuva and to come closer to me. Why? Because you have holiness within you. There's something of a likus inside you. So this is one level. It's taka a very high level. However, over here now the king reveals his essential connection to a Yid, not any levels, not any details. The Eibishter reveals to the Yid his essential attachment, that him and the Eibishter are literally one. It's like the chelik alakami mal mamish. It's not stam. It's not episomadrega. It's the essence of the Yid. The Eibishter shows how connected he is to the Yid, and when the Eibishter reveals this connection to the Yid, it's a whole other story than even what the Yid had before. Okay, be that as it may. Shlomo says the Ebedin panim sechikes bahanim shul hu atanim de lamala shbi sol atzmam. So what are these panim sechikes? I went ahead a little bit as I was explaining it. What is the Eibishter's smile? What is the Eibishter's pleasure? This is the pleasure that the Eibishter has in the Yidden themselves. What does the Rebbe mean with the words in the Yidden themselves? Shalamayla mehatanim shmikim atayra mitzvahs Yisrael. In other words, the pleasure that the Eibishter has in a Yid that's greater than the fulfillment and Torah mitzvahs of a Yid, and even higher than the pleasure that the Eibishter has in Tshuva. What then is this time? The Taning Zeu Ba'atzmus. This Taning is already in the essence of the Eibishter. So Yedua, the Baal Shem Tov came to reveal himself and to reveal his new way of showing a new way of serving the Eibishter. The Fidik Rebbe describes at great length what was going on amongst the Yidden, and this worldview is still prevalent in many circles to this day. That what's the value of a Yid? The value of a Yid is, to a very small degree, his fulfillment of mitzvahs, and to a much larger degree, his study of Torah. Yiddishkeit, his study of Torah, his scholarship, his level of scholarship. Yiddishkeit was almost turned into an exclusive thing that belonged to the lucky few who were gifted by the Eibishter with a good head and with good financial situation, that they were able to dedicate most of their time to the study of Torah and succeeded in it. And those who didn't were viewed as nearly worthless. They're even less than second class, even less than second class. Their only value was perhaps that they could show respect, they could give honor to those who learned Torah. So therefore, maybe they had, they had maybe something that was worth it to them, and this was a concept that it devolved into a state that really was foreign to Yiddishkeit. In other words, if there's always this idea in Yiddishkeit that the study of Torah and the fulfillment of mitzvahs is paramount, is of utmost importance, and if you're a Yid and you consider yourself a Yid, you must do these things. However, to say that that's the totality of a Yid, the entire value of a Yid is only if he fulfills Torah and mitzvahs, and a Yid who does not fulfill Torah and mitzvahs, he has no value because there is no greater depth to a Yid. The entire emek of a Yid is only his Torah and mitzvahs. That's already something that was that was rampant in the time when the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself. And the Baal Shem Tov came to show something, to show that it's not so. That the connection of a Yid to the Eibishter is like the connection between a father and a child. That's how it's described. B'ni b'cheri Yisrael. Right? The Yidden are described as the Eibishter's firstborn child. What's the definition of a connection between a father and a child? Right? We have friends. There are those who are connected to socially in our circle of friends and relatives, etc. And over there, that relationship is all defined by the details. If I have a certain type of personality and another person has a different type of a personality, and it's a good match between us, so then we'll be friends. Or if we grew up together in the same neighborhood, in the same class, in the same school, so we'll be friends. And these are all great things. However, how deep does it go? How deep does it touch? Everybody understands that it doesn't go to the depth of the essence of the person. And therefore, what would happen if circumstances change, interests in life change? Never mind if somebody does something that wasn't nice and good to his friend. So the friendship will naturally, cool off. When it comes to a father and a child, it's a whole other story. The connection between a father and a child is the essence of the father. A father can have many different children. He loves every single one of them just the same. There may be some children who he's more proud of. There's maybe some children who are more his nature, but his love and his sacrifice for his children is equal. If a father had to choose between any of his children, he couldn't. Even the ones that he enjoys spending time with more, but if he had to make a choice, he couldn't. There's no difference at that level. A father would give up his life for any one of his children, even a child who he hasn't seen in years. And this is what the Eibishter reveals to a Yid. There's the joy that the Eibishter has in a Yid when the Yid fulfills Torah and mitzvahs. And that's a very high level of joy. It's a high level of tainug. However, that's a tainug murkav. It's not a joy that the Eibishter has in the Yid himself. It's a joy that the Eibishter has because the Yid fulfilled mitzvahs and studied Torah. Then there's a much deeper joy that the Eibishter has in a Yid. That the Eibishter says, regardless of what the Yid did, regardless of where the Yid is holding, he's my child. He's b'ni b'chayri. And therefore I love him endlessly, unconditionally. And this touches me much deeper. The fact that he's my child touches me much deeper than anything that the child does or does not do. And this is what the Eibishter reveals to a Yid. When the Yid becomes awakened to return to the Eibishter, and he's given further strength by the Eibishter showing him, receiving him with a happy face. And now he truly returns to the Eibishter with a full force. So to finish the job, the Eibishter shows him now just how meaningful he is, just how meaningful every single one of us are to the Eibishter. The Eibishter shows us that we touch the Eibishter kivyochel in the atzmus. We touch the essence of the Eibishter. And this is what the king gives us with his parniyafis. His love to us, his essence is what he shows us. That we touch his essence, that's what he shows us. Through this, that the king shows it to the Yid. He reveals it to the Yid. Now some of the Yid understands. He understands who he is. He's a person who the Eibishter, with his entire essence, cares about him, is proud of him, loves him, is close to him, and makes efforts to help him. When the Yid sees that, this awakens within him, like a mirror image, like you mentioned last year, the pleasure in a likus. In other words, it makes a likus, it makes Eibishter something that's important, enjoyable to him. And that's something that it becomes his life's interest. Until he reaches the high level where the pleasure in a likus, the enjoyment in a likus, the connection, it's really not so proper to use the word pleasure. It's not only a word of pleasure. It's to say, this is what my entire soul is all about, is attached to, is connected to. That becomes his essence. And this gives him even more strength. That this Yid, who just a few moments ago found himself in a situation of sin, found himself in a situation of being over, and even mitzvahs leisa said, suddenly sees the Eibishter's love to him, feels the Eibishter's connection to him, and that gives him even more power that he should become a changed person. That instead of yesterday, he was interested in money and in food and in other things and in ways that are not allowed. Now suddenly he just wants to be connected to the Eibishter. He wants his life, his love in life becomes now being connected to the Eibishter. We'll finish in 2 minutes the 2 questions that the Rebbe has now. If this then is the explanation, the Rebbe has 2 questions. Like this, the next year we'll start with the Rebbe's answer, which is really the Rebbe's word of the Maimon. Tzarich Lahavin asks the Rebbe, if this is the full story, the Alter Rebbe didn't stop with the fact that the king goes out to the field. The Alter Rebbe also started discussing Mekablam Sefer Panim Yafis, that the king shows them a shining face, receives them with a shining face. And also Panim Seichekais, and we just finished explaining just how empowering this is to a Yid. So it's not only that the Eibishter makes it possible for us to do the Avodah, that because the king's in the field, everybody has the permission and the ability to go out and receive him. This actually awakens the person. This awakens within them the will to return to the Eibishter. Nevertheless, we term the Avodah of Elul to be Ani Ledodi. That it's the Yid's Avodah. The Rebbe just finished saying how much the king pumps the Yid up, full of emotion, full of feeling, full of revelation, and nevertheless we're saying it's still the Yid's Avodah? It's not the Yid's Avodah anymore. It's the Eibishter who's schlepping the Yid along with him. If the Rebbe adds, this, that the revelation of Elul is not only giving power, but it even awakens the Yid, which is already not the Yid. He's being awakened by the Eibishter. Moving gamin close into the Melech Basada. You could really ask that question on the entire concept of the king being in the field. This was your question that you said all the way in the beginning. The mere fact that the king is out in the field also doesn't really sit so well. with the fact that it's the Yid's Aveda, the fact that the king went out in the field. It's true, with the way we described it earlier, that everybody has the permission and the ability to go and see the king. However, there's also a little bit of an added element. The mere knowledge that the king now finds himself in the field, he came. He left his place where he's busy with the fancy people, with the better people, and he went out to our place of the simple people. The mere knowledge that the king came to such a place, it awakens within the person a feeling of closeness to the king. Hey, the king left his fancy palace to come to the far out village, to come to my place to see how I live. This also awakens the Yid to come closer to the Eibishter. So now suddenly the Rebbe doesn't understand the entire word of the Alter Rebbe. If Melech Besada is supposed to be an explanation for Ani Ledodi, for the Aveda of a Yid and Elul, how does it all fit? First of all, the Alter Rebbe says Panim Seichekes and Sefer Panim Yafes, and even with, which is all the king showering the Yid with love and with connection and with closeness, that drags the Yid along with him. And even without that, the mere fact that the king has left his higher worlds, the Eivishter left the Elam Yisraelim and came down to us to see how we're doing, even just that touches us in some way, like you mentioned in the beginning of the Shir, and it makes us want to come closer to the king. So what happened to Ani Ledodi? What happened to the Aveda of a Yid, that it's the Yid's Aveda? So the whole thing doesn't make sense.
Did you mention the O there?
Which one?
25.
ובפעל דה הסברנו שכוונת המלך בירידתו לסוד, right, היא בכדי שגם אנשי הסוד יוכלו להקבל לספונוב, בשביל זה הוא מוותר על גילוי כסר מלכוס ולבושי מלכוס, שעל ידי זה יסער אל אידיו, שכמובן פנים לפנים רצים להקבל לפני המלך. And especially if the Yid thinks to himself of what the king gave up. The king is sitting, I didn't go drop to what it says, I'm saying, but the king is sitting in the seat of comfort, in a place where everything is beautiful and magnificent. It's surrounded just with the most wonderful, fantastic things. David mentions only his keser, malchusei. He has to take his crown off. Like we mentioned earlier, right? When the king travels, he doesn't travel with his crown and with his robe and with his royal robes. And why did he do all of this? Why did the king give up on his own comfort zone? The king left his own natural state, his own comfort zone. He did it just in order so that you should be able to come to him. And when he realizes that, so it makes the mere fact that the king is in the field an even bigger push from the king's part that you should come and see him. So how does this fit with the whole story of Elul, which is supposed to be the time when we do our Aveda to come to the Eibishter? It sounds very much like the Aveda of Tishrei, when the Yid reveals himself on the world with his full glory. Shkeach. Ay, 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 ay.